Okay, so this time we're going to try, we're going to do a quick and dirty. We'll put Proxmox onto the G4, and then we'll install Ubuntu as a virtual machine through Proxmox and see how that works. So let's look up Proxmox, download. All right, we want to do the ISO installer and save. Okay, now that we have Proxmox downloaded, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make an installer for it. I'm just going to overwrite the same drive that USB drive that I used for the other one. So we'll go into Rufus again. It knows that that's the one I'm going to overwrite, so I'm going to select my Proxmox, open, okay, all right, and then we'll go ahead and start. Okay, so that's finished, and we'll pop that out. Okay, we'll go and pick our USB drive, and we'll go ahead and say install Proxmox. Ah, interesting. So we are being told that we haven't turned on virtualization. So at this point, we won't be able to continue until we make those changes and then try it again. So let me show you. So we'll say OK. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize it actually let me do the installation, but I think what we'll do instead is let's get out of here and we'll go into the BIOS and do the correct settings. So what I'm going to do is reboot and hit the escape key, and so I can go in and set it. Okay, back in the boot area, or boot menu, we're going to go down to BIOS setup. And the setups here are very, relatively similar with the different versions. G1, of course, looks very different, but I think you could probably get the gist. You have to poke around, but essentially what we're looking for is some sort of advanced area and then some sort of system option. And what we're interested in is anything that talks about virtual. Some of them just have one of these. This one happens to have two. I'm going to turn on both of them so that way it can do virtualization. That's pretty much it, just those two. We're going to see if we're going to have to deal with anything having to do with secure boot. I know in earlier Proxmoxes there were issues where I know I had to go in and turn off secure boot and make sure they're just doing legacy. So let's get out of here. Let's go back to main and let's say save changes and exit. Yes. And then we'll have to hold down the escape again, so that way we can go back into the boot menu and then rerun the Proxmox installer. Okay, boot menu, and we'll go into Kingston. You may notice I cheated a little bit. I instead of using that Vulkan SSD, I happen to have an old school hard disk drive laying around, and I thought I'd put it on there in case I need to go back and do any kind of comparisons between the two. And it's kind of been a long time. I don't know if I've even used a mechanical drive in any of my EliteDesks, but we'll give it a try. So anyway, we're going to boot from the Kingston. And we'll do the install Proxmox graphical. Okay, so this time no message saying that we didn't have virtualization turned on, etc. So we would pick our target hard disk. In this case, I only have the one, which is this Western Digital. We'll go next. There we go. Sorry. Next, we'll pick our time zone. Let's see. We'll do Detroit again. Password. This is kind of like an admin password, so make it something relatively easy to remember. I'm not even quite sure what this email is, but we'll just put in whatever. Okay, so now it's going to, by default, it picks this PVE for the name of the sort of server that's going to be created. This IP address, it's pulling from DHCP. I would recommend, because it's going to set, it doesn't use DHCP, it always uses hard-coded ones, is I would make sure to put this as an address that is going to be static in your system. So I'm just going to pick a low-numbered one here. I believe this hasn't been used. Okay, we'll say next. Okay, it's just kind of verifying everything. And now we'll say install. And the install is relatively quick. We'll see it probably a little slower since we're using mechanical drive, but it goes through, gets all this stuff set up. I would recommend, depending on how you're doing it, at least a 256 gig setup, so that way you can create some VMs, maybe a little bit bigger. Everyone does a little different. This is just a quick and dirty Proxmox install. I tend to do it where I'll have maybe on the SSD, I'll do some stuff, but then I'll maybe add a M.2 later and use that for my VMs, because it's a little faster. Everyone does it different. I also have ones where I just do everything just straight on the SSD. It works great too. That's funny because normally this section is so fast. I mean, normal Proxmox install is pretty fast, but you have a combination of a larger drive, which is this is a 1 gig, and obviously it's got to be the fact that your mechanical, or what is it, probably a fourth of the speed of just the straight SSD, and then of course if you were installing directly on M.2, it would be really blazing fast. So yeah, normally this doesn't take as long, and it just goes right through. I haven't even seen it where it just sits there on 3%. So we'll see what overall performance when it's running. But the nice thing with Proxmox is it's right down at the metal, so it's a pretty fast environment. One other thing, and maybe this is, I don't know, you'll see later, but maybe it's not painfully obvious, but the one quasi drawback with Proxmox, of course, is that it assumes that you have a second machine that you're going to be using to connect to the Proxmox server and be able to get to everything. Meaning that if all you have in your possession is just a EliteDesk, no other computer, Proxmox is not really going to be your thing, because in order to get into do anything with Proxmox, you pretty much need the web interface. Well, the web interface you're going to be running on another machine. Okay, we've got the install. Oh, it was a little too fast, but basically it's going to tell us that once it boots up, that you're going to have to put in the IP address :8006, and that will allow you to get to the Proxmox server screen. Oh, this is a good sign. Okay. So here we're booting in. It's loading. Okay, so here it is. Gives the listing, the HTTPS and 8006, and we'll go over there for our next section. Okay, we're going to type in that URL. Okay, you'll get this, your connection not private, blah, 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 advanced. Keep going to it. All right. Username is root. And hopefully you remember that password from before. And you can do the save username if you want, because you're going to be going in here quite a bit. You can create other users and all that kind of stuff, but for my thing, I've never had to create a second user. I just go always with root. So do login, and this has to do with subscription. Don't worry about that. Say OK. And here we have our setup. If I click on here, if I go to summary, this has information about my machine, which is an 8500T. It's got 6 cores. This is basically the kernel version. It is doing secure boot, which is nice to know that that is working. It wasn't working before in my earlier versions of Proxmox. And so our next step will be to create a virtual machine on here and then install the Ubuntu onto it. And I can kind of show you some of the nice features like snapshots, where you can make changes, see that everything's wrong, and then go back and change it and go back, so that way, let's say you installed some software you didn't like, and it's always sometimes hard to make sure that all the stuff got taken out, or maybe you accidentally deleted something, then you can go back to a prior snapshot. First thing we'll want to do is upload that ISO that we downloaded before that we used for our other Proxmox install. So we want to click on the PVE so it opens this guy up, and then go down to local. That's sort of like the local drive, and then pick ISO images and click on upload. And then we can select a file, and we'll pick the Ubuntu, we'll say open, and we'll upload. When it's completed, you should see something like this, where it pulls it, does a copy, and should say task OK. You can close it, and now you've got this as an ISO that you can pick from. Okay, to create a VM or virtual machine, we'll have this highlighted, and I'm going to click on Create VM. It's going to come up, and we'll just say, we'll just call it First VM. It has to know what the ISO image it's going to use to do the installation. And since we already uploaded it into this local area, if we do the drop down, we find our Ubuntu. Wants to know the type. It already pre-filled in the Linux and the version. You could also pick for things like Microsoft Windows, and then you could pick, version 11, etc. So do next. System, you can pretty much keep all of this as it's already listed. Disks, this is where we specify how large of a drive we want to do. By default, it's going to put it into this local LVM storage. 35 gigs should be plenty, for our testing. We'll leave it at that. And now we want the CPU. So we've got 6 core. So let's use 2 of them for this particular VM. So for memory, we'll do 4 gig, 4096. Keep everything here. And confirmation, we'll say finish. Does a little bit of work here and waiting for it to show up. And it's ready. Okay, so what we want to do is we actually want to start it up. So we'll click on Start. And we want to go over to the console because this is where we're going to see the installer. So right away it pops up. Now what's nice is we didn't have to create, you know, a bootable flash drive in order to do this install. We just copied up that ISO file. So now we can do our same. We can do our install Ubuntu and go through all the same stuff. Do a normal. And it already has a network connection. It actually is going to give it a virtual, or you know, it uses like a virtual driver, virtual network connection, but it will have its own IP address, and you can have, of course, multiple VMs, and they'll each have their own IP. So go ahead and install. Continue. And we'll say continue. Same sort of stuff. And we'll let it run. When it gets to the point where it says it's finished copying the files, then you start seeing where it's doing the actual installing of the operating system. So here it's going through, and we'll pop back. Wow. Remind me not to use mechanical drives in my EliteDesk. That was so much slower. That was pretty bad. So, okay, we'll go ahead and restart and let it do its, I mean, internally it's restarting. It's not, you know, it says, you know, remove the installation media. Well, technically what we can do for that is if we go to hardware, we can go into right here where it has a CD drive, and we can say do not use any media. That kind of clears it out. We can go back to the console, and now we can hit enter. Okay, for some reason I had to click off and back on to console, and now it, you know, brings me up to the login. That's usually not the case. Again, it may be just be some slowness with the mechanical drive. So I can log in. And here we are. If we wanted to, we could go full screen. We'll skip this. Next. I don't need to send that. And just like the other one, probably we wait a little bit, it's going to say that it needs updates. But one thing I wanted to show before we got into that was the whole concept of the backups and snapshots. So let's go into here and let's do let's power it off. And again, we're just powering off the VM. We're not powering off our G4. So and then we can exit from this full screen. Guy's still over here. What's kind of neat now is we can go to snapshots and we can say take a snapshot, and we'll call it before updates. And that's about it. If we wanted to, we could also make a backup of the whole thing, and then that would you know, if we ever needed to fully restore, but generally the snapshot is good. So we come back here, let's start it up again. Go to console. Okay, we'll go ahead and log in. And I'll just show a real simple example of how you can have the stuff, all these changes, and then do the rollback. So I'm going to go into terminal. And let's see. Let's do an ls of, let's see, is there anything in the user? Okay, how about user bin? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. I'm going to send that to a text file. So I do ls. There's my test.txt. Maybe I'll even make a folder about make directory test. And so I've got test as a folder and test.txt as a file. Okay. Now we'll exit. We'll do our shutdown again. Wait for this to show dimmed out. That it's not running anymore. Okay, now let's go to snapshots. Let's pick this one and say rollback. And just current state will be lost, sure. And these snapshots are great if you're doing some sort of testing or configuration. You're not quite sure, like, hey, I'm trying to install this, configure that. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it right. And if things mess up, I want to be able to go back. Well, the snapshot's great because now, again, I can, let's restart the Ubuntu. And I'll go into console again. And let's see, we'll go ahead and log in. And let's bring up terminal. And let's do an ls. Hey, where did my folder go? Where did my text file go? Well, they went away because I did a rollback to a prior snapshot. And you can have multiple snapshots, you could have something that says, okay, this is before I did everything. Do a snapshot. Maybe you go along a little later and you go, hey, things are looking pretty good. I'll do another snapshot. And then, further. So that way, maybe you don't want to go all the way back to the very beginning, but you want to go to a point at which you felt comfortable with. So you can do that. And of course, with the I could have a whole bunch of VMs on here. I can also make it so that, and so I could flip between them. And then if I wanted to, I could also, for a particular VM, go into options and say start at boot, which means whenever your GeForce starting up, then it's going to start up Proxmox, and it's going to automatically start up that particular VM. So you can have, multiples. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, this is kind of a weird way to be able to run the Ubuntu desktop. And I would agree. Although, it's kind of up to everybody. I mean, if I can go into full screen and I can run my stuff, and I'm just looking for something to maybe evaluate, different distros. So maybe I'll try it on this for a while, or maybe I'll see what kind of the performance is on it. And then that way I don't have to switch between, reinstall, pull out disks and so forth. I can just simply have the VM. And then if I get to a point where I go, I don't want it anymore, you can just, let's see, right now it's dimmed out because it's running. But if I stopped it, I could come in here and just say remove, and it's all gone. I don't have to, it's gone. I don't have to reformat a disk. I don't have anything. So it gives you some options. So I just wanted to kind of introduce folks to to Proxmox just kind of in general stuff, believe me, there's tons of other videos that I'm sure go much more in depth, and I would say definitely go and view those. You can get into things like clusters where you have multiple EliteDesks all working together. You can have it, which I do sometimes, and what the cool thing with that is that you could have a VM running on one of them, and you go, I don't want it on this one anymore. I want it on this other one because maybe I'm going to swap some memory, or I'm going to do various things with it. I just want to move over, or I want to dupe it. I really like this particular Ubuntu installation. I want to make a copy of it, and I want to copy it to somewhere else. So you can clone, you can do a whole litany of stuff. So I definitely would recommend it if you want to do more experimentation. If you want just straight pure Ubuntu and want to get as much out of the hardware, probably just installing it directly on there. But I think you're going to find that if you're really wanting to experiment, then the Proxmox way is going to work a lot better for you.